Hello, and a very warm welcome to Fighting Misinformation Online 2023. I'm Dr. Sian Williams. I'm a journalist and also a psychologist. There has never been a more important time to talk about misinformation.
This event gathers a diverse community of people and organizations that invest time and resources and energy to better understand and address the risks of online information space. And a diverse community working together is precisely what we need to address such a complex and multi-layered problem.
What technology has shown us is that all of us around the world, regardless of language or culture, actually have far more in common than we have differences. We are all being manipulated the exact same way. It is through our amygdala. Our emotions are targeted, fear, anger, and hate. And that changes the way we look at the world, and it changes the way we act.
Most of us come across news on social media. We don't necessarily go to social media to get news. We scroll along engagement news and cat videos and come across misinformation when we are not necessarily there to be vigilant and critical, but rather because we're bored or have some time to kill or because we are tired. And that is not necessarily the most cognitively alert state to be in when engaging.
That is very true.
How do we get better collectively at providing people with context about what they're seeing online? Of course, part of this is how was this generated? But again, that's only one part of what kind of context you need as a person. You might want to know also, like, maybe when it came up first, maybe what sources are pushing it, maybe what others are saying about the same topic. All of these things will over time help you calibrate on whether you believe something or not.
We have never had such easy access to infinite amount of information coupled with freedom of expression in democracies. But this mix can be abused and have distorting effects on the information space, in particular as information is increasingly personalized and pushed to us via algorithms or manipulated by bad actors.
We're meeting at a really pressing time, not just because of dynamics in the world, from wars to pandemics to 2.5 billion people going to the polls next year, but because the nature of the challenge ahead of us is evolving with the rapid advancements in artificial intelligence. AI has long been used across Google's products, from Smart Reply in Gmail to stitching together panoramic images in Street View. But generative AI is at an exciting inflection point. It can help us solve some of the world's most challenging problems, from climate change to health and medicine. But it also makes it easier than ever to create really sophisticated, personalized bad content online, and so raises fundamental questions about the trustworthiness of information online.
It's the lack of transparency of AI systems, as into what goes into the AI systems, put in a very simplistic way, but also the lack of explainability, as in, why am I seeing what I am seeing?
Generative AI actually takes data. It doesn't think. It isn't human. This is kind of a way to try to figure out how our brains work and replicate it in a machine, but it isn't human, right? All it does is look for patterns, supercharged. It has neural networks, yes, but it is patterns.
When I think of my own concerns in the space of generative AI, I'm more thinking along the lines of a few things, like its deceptive powers, which have been illustrated today, of course, in terms of generating, for instance, false imagery or video or audio that is very convincing. We've heard that. But also this question of the liar's dividend, which some of you may be familiar with. This term has been coined, I believe, in 2018 or 19 by Bobby Cheney and Daniel Citron. The idea that in a world in which generative AI is widespread and video, audio, imagery cannot really be trusted as much anymore, it becomes possible for anyone caught doing anything they don't like to say, oh, that's not true.
We have certain mechanisms in place in our brain, rightfully so, that make, such as the confirmation bias, that make information that is aligned with our pre-existing beliefs, or information that is delivered to us in a language we know or by someone that seems familiar, is much more easier processed than information that does not. But what has happened now with social media is that these mechanisms and sort of cognitive, sometimes shortfalls, have been reinforced and accelerated.
And rewarded. Negative content is rewarded.
Yeah, that is very, very true.
When you start looking at it from a journalistic standpoint, all of the talk about efficiency and scalability suddenly collapses. Because if you're a responsible news organization, you have to have a human in the loop. And that fundamentally reduces its impact. And what's interesting about that, of course, is it means that actually generative AI is much more useful as a tool if you are either not interested in the truth, potentially for legitimate reasons, you're creative, or you actively want to mislead people, but you don't really mind how you do it.
Here's the thing. Garbage in is garbage out. You need to know what the foundational models were fed with. And if it was fed with social media, which is full of toxic garbage, then we know where it is. Now, having said that, this just came out. It's from Stanford University. It's a way to kind of figure out how transparent are these companies. Foundation Model Transparency Index, if you look at this, all 10 companies failed.
Since the 50s, it has been theorized that AI could someday become the invention of a method of invention. And I think that we think about that a lot, and that in the long term or medium term, we're going to see its ability to come up with new types of things that are clearing roadblocks and bottlenecks that have been intractable to humans. So it's already being used for fusion research, nuclear fusion research, identifying new types of antibodies, new ways of mitigating climate change through more sophisticated modeling and kind of global surveillance in a way, but monitoring systems for how the patterns are changing and what we can do to adapt to it. There's also the economic issues of it. Like if it's able to create a lot of economic growth and development, we could really see a lot of living standards going up in a global way.
The flood of harmful content online continues to be one of the biggest challenges for our democracies, as it affects the democratic discourse and can manipulate the choices of people when it comes to elections.
I think to allow users to be in an ecosystem that is safe, where they can have more information, whether the information that they are encountering is true or not, and to have context, also to be prepared for narratives, for example, that they manipulate them through media literacy measures. I believe this is to add to democracy and not there is no contradiction between the freedom of speech.
I would like to show you this figure of the Dutch author Bart Brandsma. And what he basically says is polarization, and I totally agree, polarization in discussions is critical in any vital democracy. We need polarization. Toxic polarization, we don't. So in this figure, you see on the outside the pushers. Those are the people who spread mis and disinformation. And the influence of that is that it instigates doubt. It fuels doubt to the middle, to the people in the center, the silent, the bystanders. And it's exactly those people that we address.
A good example, actually, is the Slovakia election. And there we were expecting that we might see some coordinated disinformation from foreign interference forces, from Russia, to be blank. And we didn't see much of that. But what we did see is some local coordinated narratives, which were springing up, and some of them were based around targeting certain groups, which we were aware of before they came to the platform. And then when they did, we took very swift action. I think we took down 14 channels in the months beforehand that were engaged in a coordinated deceptive practices behavior.
I would like to begin with a story from Slovakia, as we had our elections at the end of September. After the moratorium started, there was another fake recording that surfaced. It was a talk between the said leader of the Progressives with a prominent Slovak journalist. They were allegedly, on this recording, they were talking about how exactly the election manipulation will roll out. There were some envelopes mentioned, some payouts, and the people had this kind of a feeling that when hearing this recording, they got to see the background of how this is happening. Now, this recording was fact-checked by our fellow fact-checkers at AFP Slovakia, who have done a really great job as they addressed it really fast so that actions could be taken. Instead of technical solutions, they addressed experts and tech companies that are focusing on AI or hybrid threats. This kind of recording, it played right exactly to their prior beliefs, prior biases, which is, as we know, something that works the best for people. Now, can we tell that the AI recordings were something that could have tipped the elections? Of course, we do not know, as it targeted mostly the people who were already convinced, but it may have influenced the mobilization. And as we know, that mobilization is something that can win an election.
You can already ahead of the elections prepare for how to mitigate the risks from generative AI through good labeling to warning users. There is potential to collaborate with media literacy specialists to make the population voters more immune, to build good relationships with fact-checkers, to have good content moderation teams in place in every language, because it's important that all markets, whether the languages are small or big, are equally protected.
If you don't have facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, we have no shared reality. We cannot have democracy, let alone solve those existential problems.
Illegal content has to be removed. We have the laws in place. We are not creating any new kind of digital crime. We are just working with the criminal laws in all the member states, and we want them to be applied in online sphere. But when it comes to disinformation, well, we have to take gloves. We are playing with something where the result, unintended consequence of our work might be the harm to the freedom of speech in the EU.
We're a platform where people come to search for information. They want to know stuff. So news and YouTube are natural partners. And so we're investing very heavily to ensure that YouTube is a place where both legacy news organisations, like the one that both Kamal and I used to work for, but also emerging new journalists and new news organisations can come to, and can use our ability to create business models, both to help with the distribution side of things, but also to help with the creation side of news content.
Too many of us are tempted to use the digital space to shed heat rather than light. Often, we see attempts to pressure the media and switch off their roles as credible informers and fact providers. The media that is indispensable in providing facts and creating a sense of shared reality.
Now we live in a far more performative environment where everyone performs on social media. In fact, if you look at the social media platforms, they spread the disinformation faster than the facts, because facts are super boring and you don't share it. Please share the news sites, right? So I think the long-term, the mid to long-term view is actually something I think countries like America is dealing with right now, because the algorithmic choices have pulled us all apart. It is playing out in our news.
We need to formulate the balance between the platforms and media, so that nobody is the omnipotent arbiter of what truth is.
Traditional media does an amazing job. What we are seeing around the world today, and particularly in the Middle East, the risk that journalists are putting themselves in, and many have lost their lives, to report from the ground and the facts is so vital that journalism matters to good society and to democracy. But we also need a new ecology of storytelling which is different from the storytelling that I grew up with, which was much more professor of news tells willing audience, parent to pupil communication, what we call the vertical storytelling model. We are building a horizontal storytelling model, friends finding out together, something that feels much more in the vernacular of the platforms.
You know, one of the roles of a platform like YouTube, and indeed of Google, is to understand what's happening not just on our platforms, but what's happening off our platforms, where some of these misinformation debates and narratives are springing from. And so that we're in a position when we do see them coming onto the platform to take swift action. And so we invest very heavily. Google has for a long time invested very heavily in intelligence gathering and understanding of what's happening in the world around us, so that when we do see some of these narratives begin to emerge, we're able to sort of head them off at the pass.
The world's largest distributor of news is Meta, Facebook, and they have choked traffic to news anywhere from 50% up to 80%. I think The Guardian is at 75% drop in news traffic from this, right? So that means you're going to get less news on your feed by design.
I think it's really important to understand that trust and safety isn't trying to identify what's fact and what's false. Yeah. There are some spaces where there's clear fact. The WHO guidance during COVID, or an election result from an authoritative information election provider, those are facts that we can refer to through authoritative external sources and determine if something is true or not. But in the majority of cases, what we're actually doing is try to minimize harm. We're trying to get at the hate speech, the violence, the shocking content. We're trying to get at the misrepresentation of a business or a fact or an image, and trying to take those down, take actions on those, or provide more context to the user on those. And I think that's really important to understand, because I think sometimes our work is misunderstood as being about what's true and what's false, rather than about trying to tackle harm and potential harm to individuals and society.
Elections cannot become the race of dirty methods. It also undermines trust in public institutions and respectable news outlets, and it may lead even to news avoidance. Both those indicators were on the low in the latest Reuters digital news report, with a stunning 36% of respondents arguing the often depressing news agenda as a reason for not reading it at all.
I'm going to talk for a little bit about some of our findings on news avoidance and how that connects to misinformation. But what I really want to draw your attention to is the line at the bottom of this chart. This is showing the proportion who said they didn't use any of these sources in the last week. So this was just 1% in the UK in 2013. Now it's at 9% 10 years later. If we look at the data for Germany as a comparison, again, exactly the same picture as we saw in the UK. And you can see that in some countries, particularly those at the top of this chart, there's been a very sharp decline in the proportion who say they're highly interested in the news. And the reason we think this is important is because interest underlies all sorts of news behaviours.
We simply can't accept what we currently see. Online platforms being a tool for terrorists. Yes, we have to pay attention to the rise of anti-Semitism, both offline and online. Primarily, this is about security of our Jewish communities. But also, this protection has to be extended to online world.
So there's a battle inside Silicon Valley, and I hope trust and safety wins, because this is going to impact our information ecosystem. What is the Brussels effect? When Israel, by the way, tanks are rolling into Gaza, maybe about at the beginning of the hour, right? So when Hamas attacked Israel, when that happened, you saw the level of when hate and anger is amplified, instead of tamped down by good leaders, instead of bridging, when the information ecosystem encourages the spread of hate, anger, fear.
We need to further empower the fact-checkers, the experts, the researchers. They need better access to platforms, better access to data. We need platforms to cooperate with fact-checkers and integrate their work better in all EU languages.
Fact-checking to a certain extent is preaching to the choir. We are mostly reaching people who are already well informed. And exactly that, the question, how can we make those good investigative short, quick stories, how can we raise their impact, how can we make those more visible?
We've been investing in close partnerships, including with many of you here today, to strengthen fact-checking, media literacy, and research on disinformation for many years.
We want to be adherent to an increasingly complex and unstable geopolitical context, and we need to give, therefore, a specific attention to those projects that can help to understand the highest level of threats that disinformation is posing in this space, particularly when it originates from state actors that are outside Europe, when there is risks of foreign interference. But having said that, we have not to lose sight that much of the disinformation is homegrown, is domestic, and needs to be understood much better in a more granular way by looking at what are the themes of disinformation that are most likely to be used and abused by malicious actors in order to influence public opinions.
A story that I brought is a story about a video that went viral, claimed to be shot in Angola, showing people destroying, quote unquote, polluting solar panels with your tax money, quote unquote, and it would be a sign of, quote unquote, protesting against climate madness. Well, that is obviously not the case here. So, says Anna, hello, this video shows the protest of a group of Indian workers who were not paid for the construction of a solar panel park. I read it here, greetings, Anna from the Checkers. And what is remarkable here is that not only the person who posted this tweet explicitly thanks Anna for the information, but he also retracted his tweet, so he deleted this piece of misinformation.
I don't want to be pessimistic. Our future does not have to be digital version of Orwell 1984, but we have to make sure that by having safeguards, effective law, and most of all, the will of businesses, the civil society, and the people to avoid that, to maintain and secure freedom and democracy also in digital age.
Last year, 60% of the world, according to VDEM, is now under authoritarian rule. This year, January this year, that number went up to 72%. We know there's a danger already. We feel it, we know it, both hearts and minds, so now we need to act.
To defend ourselves, we need to organize ourselves and support the good elves and other organizations that are also in this room today. They are helping citizens to harness the benefits of the online world, create a level playing field for the technology companies that provide access to the internet and minimize the harms.
We need to have a priority ensured for projects that look at disruption created by technology, by AI. And I'm happy to say that in our portfolio, there are a number of projects that are both using AI in order to improve the detection methodologies and tools, but also that look at AI as a threat, as a potential threat that can change the rules of the game when you think in terms of information manipulation.
We predominantly fuse political and media literacy education together by running training courses with young people and practitioners like teachers, youth workers, as well as democratic engagement campaigns. We run programs across the City of London as well as other areas of the UK to increase democratic engagement and understanding of how our democratic process works. We launched the first, what we called a democratic helpline, where we used essentially WhatsApp to give people information that they needed. So especially with the Elections Act, for example, it can get very complicated very quickly. And what people need for us, we found, was that they need tailored advice specifically tailored to them and their particular needs. And through the WhatsApp chatbot, we were able to give people, based on the questions and the information they gave us through that bot, able to give them exactly what they needed when they needed for their eligibility to vote and elsewhere.
The final aspect is education and media literacy. These are the best antibodies for the virus of disinformation. If we understand better how we source and obtain information, we will be better prepared against attempts of manipulation and interference.
Our children really struggle to tell the truth from the facts to opinions and misinformation. Be internet citizens is a series of lessons upskilling young people to be positive digital citizens, online and offline. We explore and unpack concepts such as free speech, hate speech, us versus them, and what we're all here now is for dis and misinformation. We had to make it engaging and interesting. The greatest tool and message is for them to have a voice. They have to feel so safe that they've disclosed so much about their lives to us. They really want to become aware of what they are consuming and creating online.
We define what we don't want to see as disinformation, as something which has been produced in a coordinated, organized manner in order with the intention to do harm to the society.
So disinformation has intent at its heart,
yes,
and it's different.
And the harm has to be really hard, yeah. And this is what we are focusing on.
If you work with countering disinformation, or if you work on very sensitive topics, LGBTQ or environment, at the end you need to meet your opponents. So it is about building a dialogue, about being an open, being open to different sides, and that's part of the critical thinking. So not rejecting the other view, but finding something in the middle.
It's a weird moment to be in technology right now. You have to move both fast and slow at the same time. Move too slow and you miss one of the pivotal moments of our technological history. Move too fast and you risk creating more harm than good. We're trying to find the right balance between boldness and responsibility.
I think that what is important is that the communities, right, that we trust each other. So the issue is how you share and what you share. And I think here, those communities, they do need support, they do need education, but they also need trusted partners. And I think that's the difficult part.
If we have the notion that it takes a village to raise a child, it's going to take a global community to enable people to see the type of information that helps them navigate the world and be good citizens.
We think the battle is out there. It's in Ukraine, it's in the Middle East, but no, it's you, it's with you. We are each fighting a battle, and it is in our phones, right?
That we need to tell stories differently and also need to amplify different voices so that people see themselves reflected in the news. And the news should appear useful. It should be empowering to me to help me navigate the world and keep me smart. If news felt like it had the backs of the audience, it was helpful to them, and it was useful on their journeys, I think we would have far more audiences coming back to us, we hope, and the notion of what journalism is for than we're achieving at the moment.
This online political advertising regulation should come into force before the elections in June next year, and it should also improve, radically increase transparency of political campaigns before any other elections in the EU.
Is this framework with the DSA and the code of practice, you think we are in a place where it's going to be fully effective for the European election that is coming, and we all know the challenges that will come in terms of this information, particularly about the EU institutions and the integrity of the election?
Look, I think we have a strong package of measures to fight disinformation. For the Digital Services Act, that is indeed a groundbreaking framework worldwide. We need this framework to be complete, regulatory, so there we need to ask a little bit more time, but you can be sure that the European Commission will make sure that this framework is duly implemented and platforms are really taking their responsibility.
Stop surveillance for profit. This is not the only vision of the internet that we have. Number two, stop coded bias. Because women, LGBTQ+, if you are marginalized in the real world, you're further marginalized online. And finally, the third, give us a fighting chance. Journalism as an antidote to tyranny.
I believe we will have Media Freedom Act and the Political Ads, also AI Act looks good because it also is connected with whether we will have free space for expressions, and whether the human beings will not be fighting against some unregulated, unlimited power. This is what we don't want.
If we embrace our fear of the worst that can happen in 2024, work like hell not to make it not happen. Because most of the time the worst won't happen, but you will be ready for anything else coming along the way.
I trust that most of us will choose the right side of history in these increasingly tense times. Thank you very much.
Thank you.